as you can see, it's not always sunny and blue in Nova Scotia. This is another nor'easter, the second one this week, that's going through here. And it's still magnificent. Wind howling, it makes you feel quite content if you're sitting out of the wind indoors. Hey, hope you enjoyed that little view out the window, or out the doorway. I'm going to do a commission. It's a water jar with a spigot on the side of it, which is another little debate there, which we'll get into later. And but it is a large, about 13-14 pound piece of clay, and it's going to have a stand and a lid, so it'll be 3 pieces thrown. It's porcelain style B-Mix 5 clay with a black slip over the top for carving, which will be Sgraffitto, and then a clear glaze electrified after that. Okay, so let's give it a show here. So of course the big issue will be centering the clay. There you go. Let's see if I can level that up a bit. Ooh. Oh, it's got a creak. Sounds like my bones. There you go. So, mostly importantly, is you've got to make sure this piece of clay is easy for you to center. So make sure it's rounded. And I had a cube here right out of the bag, so I cut the bag in almost in half. It was a 25-pound bag. And now I'm going to test my arm. This is my trick. There's a big solid wall here, and I'm going to put my elbow against it while I'm centering it. So I've got to make sure that the wheel is just the right point away. That's a little bit close. Let's just take it a bit more apart. Yeah, that's good. So just make sure that that gives you a little bit of extra pressure to put your elbow in. We may have to move the camera a little bit. And your wheel is on, and everything's a go. All right, so I may have to stop this video in the middle because I've got customers in the gallery too. I can see them. So first thing is you've got to make sure it doesn't fall off the wheel, which I've pounded it a bit already, so it shouldn't. So we're just going to try and put some pressure on to actually make sure it's sealed on the wheel. My bat's bumping a little bit. That's not going to be too bad though. So see, my elbow cannot be pushed by the clay because it's wedged in. Of course, you've got to be a little careful that you don't let your wrist get too far because there's no give. You could snap your wrist maybe. I think that's far-fetched, but anyway, so there you go. It's almost centered already, or I can feel some ripples. So maybe what I'll do is I'm just going to make a little cone. So it goes to a point. And then I'll wet it, and I'm going to push my hands together. And this helps if you've got issues where you feel like there might be a little inconsistency in the clay. Just to cone it up a little bit, and then push it back down. And now I'm going to try and manipulate my elbow into that wall again. It's more my back of my forearm that's pushing against that wall, because the elbow bone, you don't want to do that because that would hurt you. It's about the right width for the water jar. Maybe I have to narrow it just a touch. Now I'm going to put my hand right to the back because it's spread out a little bit there. Yeah, this is Thanksgiving weekend in Canada. It's kind of early because I'm used to the one in the States. I lived there for, how many, 27 years in the States. Okay, so that's centered pretty much. Now, here's a trick. I showed you in a different video actually. But if you put your rib against the clay, get some water on it, you can really square it off If there's anything in there that's kind of irritating you, like this bit just there, I can see is a dimple. That might put me off when I'm pulling the wall. Just because it's a change of level, so it helps if you do that. And you've got a really nice, you can do it on the top too if you want to, but we're going to put a dimple in there anyway. But anyway, so find the center, push down, and don't push down unless you know you got the center. And you just make a little dimple there that you can actually put some water in, and that'll help lubricate it all the way down. And now it takes a lot of pressure to push down that huge piece of clay there. I'm used to throwing like this when I have customers in the gallery, and then as soon as I get to the point where I'm pulling the wall and it gets really thin, somebody wants some help, and they wave at the camera, I have everybody trained. And you can usually tell there's 3 people wandering around in there now that they're carrying something, and they look kind of lost because they think, who the heck works here? Okay, so I'm getting down. I'm going to have to take a look in a minute. Oh, now it's bumping off the pins again. I like these big solid bats, but I'm going to have to drill some new holes in them because the pins are loose on those. Because it's particle board, I think these bats are made of. Yeah, I've got to go down just a touch more. It just pushed back on, now it's pushed off again. That would really upset beginners, I know. So I'm just kind of opening it up. I'm using the sponge between my fingers on the clay. You can stop it bumping just by putting a piece of paper over the pin or something like that, but it really doesn't bother me that much because it will push back onto the central point anyway in a second. It seems like as soon as I start pulling the wall, it will. So I've got, let's see, you can see from the, oh, okay, now I think it's time for you to have a view from above to see what's going to happen for the rest of it. Because now you can see inside it a little bit. See, I don't know if you can tell, it's fairly thick at the bottom, so I'm just going to push down just a touch more. That's better for the bottom anyway. Let's see if I can get it opened up a little bit more. I think I can go, because when I start pulling it, I'll definitely open it more. But I'm using the sponge, if you can see that, in between my fingers and my clay wall to help lubricate. Now we've got like 6 people in the gallery. Oop. This is when somebody's going to want help because I'm going to start a pull. There you go. So I'm basically using the sponge on the outside. That's basically to even the wall out a little bit. So I didn't gain much height there, just a little bit. Now I'm going to use my knuckle, because of that shape I can get it into the wall. So I'm going to be pulling along that part of my knuckle and pushing out to get wider. And then I'll start to pull. And then I'm going to have to adjust one of the cameras, I bet now. Now I'm going to push it in because I don't want it to widen yet. So my thumb on the outside is basically pushing the clay in to get it narrower again. And I'm going to try and compress that top area there. Alright, so let's clean my hand so I can adjust the camera. Yeah, we've got 4 people still in and 3 people just left. It's a nice browsy afternoon by the look of it. Although I sold this jar this morning, this was an order, and then I sold a large lamp and a usual bunch of tiles and mugs. So it's not a bad day already. Okay, let's see if we can adjust this. Move it back and tip it up a bit. There we go, that should give us a bit more time. Wet it completely. Now same thing, I'm going to use my knuckle like that, and I'm going to be pushing the clay against there with my outside fingers, let that other sponge go, so I can get a good pull up there by pressing on the outside finger. Then I'll widen it a little bit too, because this is still too narrow. But it means I'm not putting big throwing rings on the inside. And now I'm starting to pull from the outside, I'm pressing in. You can see my knuckle where it pushes out there. The knuckle's not as sensitive as your fingers though, so I move over now with my fingers. And I'm using my hand, the palm of my hand, to push the lip in to get it narrow again, so we can actually continue to keep the piece under control. There we go. And I'm going to repeat this time. Let's give you a bit better angle again. Water it completely. I'm going to slow the wheel down now. And I've got throwing rings on the inside from my knuckle there. So make sure that I'm kind of using my flat of my finger to flatten those out before my fingertip gets to it on the inside. And you always continue your pull till you get to the top, unless you have an emergency dry out, which, because I'm using a sponge here, it shouldn't happen. Oh, we went off the screen already. Okay, you'll have to use your imagination for this little bit. Same again, compressing the rim at the top. I'll let go a bit early so I can adjust the camera again. Now we've got about 6 to 8 people in the shop. My wife's not here today. She's manning another gallery in Lunenburg. She's a member of a community gallery there. But it seems like we've got a lot of people wandering around. Okay, and let's tilt it down. see. So we have our height. That's about what I need for the height. So now I'm going to try to shape it. So lots of water on the rim, dribble down inside and outside. Because there's so much water, I don't need to. I'm going to stand up a bit. Let's get the speed a bit slower. So now I'm pushing out. This water jar will hold about 2 gallons when it's finished. Now be careful of your arm pushing on the rim, and without your knowledge you will be widening the rim, which you probably will have to correct. So it's good not to. So just be aware that your fingertips are down there, but you've got to, if it touches your upper arm on the rim, you are actually putting pressure on that rim, which will naturally widen. So be careful not to do that. Isn't this nice? Nobody wants help at the gallery yet. It's kind of silly of me to try doing this on a Saturday afternoon, I guess. But I learned from experience that lunchtime till about 2 is fairly quiet. Look at that. Ooh, nice now. So I've got a nice solid even wall all the way up. Now I'm going to put some pressure on the lid here to get a bit more height. Not the lid, the rim. My mind is wandering because I'm watching people in the gallery too. Multitasking. So I'm not going to thin the lip up there because we've got to remember this is a big piece. So there you go. I'm just going to compress that rim down a bit. There we go. Oh, here we go. Somebody's coming up to the camera, but he's not waving. He's looking. Okay, what's the deal here? But he's thinking, I don't know. I think it's unfair of me not to go say hello. I'll have to get this dry and then I'll go say hello. Sometimes people come all the way over here because we're across the road. So I'm guessing all the water, I can leave this at that point for a couple of minutes. Look at all this slops down in there. Oh, somebody's carrying a mug. I guess I am going to have to go. So I just dried it out so I can leave this for a few minutes. Pull the sponge all the way up on the inside too. So it's nice and even. I will be right back. That was busy for about half an hour, so this thing's been sitting for a little while, but I have to finish it. So we're at the stage of basically forming. We've got a good height. I could go for a little more height if I wanted to, but I think more likely it's just about getting the width. So I'm just going to turn it on a fairly slow speed, maybe a little faster than that. There we go. And now I'm going to use this metal rib, and my hands are not wet at all, they're dry, and so because it's even all the way up, I can just put my, I don't want to get it wet anymore, I want it to dry a bit, but I'm just going to start pulling out a little bit, put an internal pressure, pushing against the rib. It's hard for you to see the bottom part, but you should be getting this as you kind of see me pull up the bottom here. So my fingers are right opposite the rib. It's called dry throwing when you do this because I'm not using any water. And the rib is there just to sort of put some pressure on so I can squeeze a little bit of extra height out. But you've got to be careful you keep it at right angles to the clay so you don't let it catch, because there's a bit of clay built up on the inside of that rib there. So I can get extra width here and maybe a little extra height as well. And this is about where I would now need to just put a little corner groove in with the top of the rib to give me that definition of the top edge of the decorative area, because this will be carved. Look how much clay that had. Then you take a look and you think, did I do it right? Yeah, that's fairly good form, but I am convinced I can get a little extra width here. So I'm going to push out a little bit at the bottom. Let's give you a little extra look at the bottom here. There you go. So I'm pushing out just a little bit at the bottom there. It's always hard to see when you're standing above something like this. And I'm going to give myself another double rib just here, double edge. It's like a little extra definition on that thing. I'll probably do something in that little edge there. Take a look. Well, it's got... Now I'm going to sit down level with it, because I think that middle area just there has to belly out a bit more. Go back down again. I'm going to have a carved area about the area that I'm working on now, which is going to have a sgraffitto carving. And then there'll be some fluting in the very bottom area. And then kind of watch your elbow, inside of your elbow at this point. There you go, that looks just that area there. Okay, so that's a nice curve now. So we're looking for what can be considered a nice form whenever you make anything. I got a definition area in that area there, just for some sort of decorative area. I'm not sure what I'll do there yet. Maybe just leave this black totally, and this will have like an etching potentially, like a herringbone type etching maybe. And then this area down to about, I've got to determine this now. So I'm going to say that to about there will be a carved area. So let's give myself a double mark there to kind of reflect the top one. And then it will be trimmed and fluted in this bottom area down there. And that's about it for now. So I don't need to take the water out. I did that all before I had to go help the customers. And this is just to get rid of the sharpness of that little line. And we've got a nice top, which will have a lid. So then you would take your calipers, make sure they're tight, and I'm going to measure this now. It's really well centered, and that's a bit bigger than I need, but that'll be the size of my lid. Okay, so it's always nice to help yourself along with the trimming, so I'm going to take a little bit of clay out there. just kind of squish that down a bit, because I will be fluting down this area here. But that's my bottom. I can trim this even thinner, but it's a big water jar. Big pieces don't have to be light. In fact, it's better when they're not super light because they don't get knocked over as much. But I probably will trim a little bit out of there. All right, let's get my hands cleaned up. Now I'm going to throw the base and the lid. First we'll do the lid because the calipers are set to the lid size. So block of clay, about 1.5 pounds. I want the lid to be substantial too so it doesn't get broken. And then centering is just easy when you got this much clay. Sorry about that. But see, I can't even reach with my elbow anyway. So you just kind of rest your arm on the actual splash pan, your left arm, and just kind of do a little bit of a cone. If you're a beginner, you should learn how to cone up like this and then push down. I can see half the clay, and that helps because I can see if it's wobbling as well as feel if it's wobbling. Alright, so go down because we want this as a lid, so it's got to be. Let's hope I've got enough clay. Okay, I want a substantial knob too, so I'm just going to define the knob area. Oh, there goes my ball of clay for the base. Okay, so then we come down, so don't go thin here, just leave it. It's drying out a little bit, get some water. Now the knob I'll work first. I want it big, so nobody drops this. Because to remake a lid, if somebody breaks it, is never going to be as good as the first one. So I'm just kind of pushing in with all my fingers, 3 of them, all the way around there, pushing in until they got dry. And then you can squish them, don't get it too thin underneath. Push down again to go and get that. And then I'm going to push up and down with the fingers. Don't make it thin. If this gets dropped, it'd be nice to think it has a chance to survive. Pushed in a bit further that time, and I'm pushing but not thinning, just trying to get it even. So you can get your hand around that easily. Now we'll take a look at the size. It's actually just about right, so I'm just going to have to do a little tweaking. Get your water off. With clay, if it's slippery and then dry in places, that's where the trouble lies. So you actually don't need lots of water to be able to throw, but you have to have enough water so that it's even, if you're going to have water at all, so that it actually, you know, doesn't go stick to your fingers and then slip fast off your fingers kind of thing. That's when it goes off center. So when you're doing something like this, you can dry it out. In this is a lot of cases you can do this actually, but I'm drying it out. Now my fingers are not really wet that much, and I just push in and it's still like able to be thrown, and then push down because it's even. It's not slipping and then dry. And then I push underneath to lift up that rim a little bit, and then push down with my middle finger on the top to get a nice substantial wide rim, and then we'll remeasure. So it's wide enough that it will cover the rim completely, and the inside rim is a bit too small, I think, so I'm going to push out just a little bit more, put my little finger underneath, and then push out with my middle finger of my left hand to give that, and then I'm going to push back with the little finger and make it a bit taller, pull that out again. See, I haven't dipped my hands in the water at all doing that, but now I want to clean it up, because it's probably the right size now. I got my new sponge I showed in another video. It's still going good. So let's remeasure. make sure I haven't too thinned it. No, I've still got about a 1/4 inch, about just over 1/2 centimeter thickness where the insert wood that will drop down into the jar itself, and then I've got about 1.25 centimeters that overhangs either side, maybe even 1.5 centimeters that overhangs, so that it will cover the entire lid area. And then I'm going to flatten that down a bit more, so you have to be a bit brave there. Push your sponge underneath to actually clean it up, and a bit more down there so it doesn't collapse, but it's flat. I want this to really flat. If it was a really tight fitting lid, they could even brew beer in one of these. And then if you want, using your fingernail on the underside there, you can just put a little spiral in. Give a little decorative element there. Alright, okay, so there's the lid. Dry out the bats. Always clean your bat. It's good practice to always clean the bat. And there you go. That's what you've got. Let's get another one of those big thick wooden bats. These are particle board, but it's like kitchen counter stuff basically. And I think when they took these out, they were putting round sinks in a counter or something. I get a lot of stuff basically from recycled surplus places. Alright, here's my bottom. It just fell over off the top down onto my board. That's a bit discoloring, but it's not going to hurt. This is the bottom. There you go. And I'm going to take that little bit, scrape off that bit of discolored clay, because if I'm going to carve this, I might end up with a little brown area there, because that's my speckled clay that got stuck on it. Alright, now this is the bottom. This may be enough clay, I don't know. I might have to throw 2 of these. We'll see how big it gets. Remember that jar has enough thickness at the bottom so I might trim it. So I'm going to take a guess at this and then I'll measure it. I can always. And it's just centering. And then I'm going to push down. Don't let it dry out. Always good, it's good timing to actually make sure you've got enough water to do your job, and then you have to let go slowly as soon as you feel like there's a little catching. Now it doesn't have to have a bottom to this piece, but it warps if you don't. I've made these without clay in the bottom and the piece will actually warp. Now here's my little round rubber rib. Ooh. There you go. There's an air bubble. I thought so. I could feel something that was just kind of clicking there. So let's get that out of here. It's either an air bubble or dry clay. Where is it? Probably when it landed on the floor, it probably picked up a bit of dry clay. I don't think it's an air bubble anyway. So let's okay, so let's have a look. That's a good thickness. So I'm going to use the rubber rib again, just to smooth it a bit. Now these bats were the same size, and I can look at the other one and say that's actually the right thick width of the piece. And then I'm going to pull up a wall and see how high I get, because this will determine whether I have to remake another base. The spigot above that piece will be about 1.5 inches to 2 inches above the bottom of the piece, and then this adds another, hopefully 2 to 3 inches, and then you can put a decent sized coffee mug underneath the actual water jar when you're serving out of it. So let's go up one more pull. I don't want to make this too thin either. And leaving it thick at the bottom here. This rim is actually the bottom of the piece because this is thrown upside down. And I think we got a good 3.5 inches there. So by the time you get the 1.5 inches, 2 inches above the bottom with the tap, it might even be 2.5 inches above. Plus this, you can get a decent coffee mug size. Most coffee mugs are about 4.5 inches high, and it may be tea bowls or whatever they're going to use. But they bought 2 of my carve mugs this morning, the people who ordered this. So this is with a wooden rib. Can't tell because of all the clay on it, but so I'm just pushing my finger against the wooden rib to scrape it clean. And I'll take the clay off the bottom there. Clean the bat up again and just kind of compress that rim a little bit. And I'll make it get a little wider, I think. And give it good stability. These things are so heavy once you fill them full of water anyway. A lot of people have those plastic containers that you fill up at the grocery stores on their kitchen counter, which don't look very nice. So I've sold quite a few of these where people have had scenes carved into them and they just pour the water from those plastic containers into the jar, which has to be a little bit heavy to lift up and do, I guess. And for a party, you can throw a pile of ice in there, like a whole bag of ice and a bunch of punch, and use it for a party. Now, let's see how big it is. I have to find my other calipers. This is the width of my jar at the bottom. So I'm going to push this down into there and see, can I... Oh, it's perfect. I'm sorry. It was perfect. All right. I'm just good because I've done it for 47 years. I mean, you'll get to that point. If anybody hates that when I say perfect, it's like you will get there. You know, it's just a matter of doing things over and over again. Your eye is trained and all that. So that's good. I don't have to fudge this one. Take the water off. Make sure it's nice to clean your bats as you're working. Take this off, and that's what we've got. So this will be the other way up, upside down, and the butt jar will sit on that. And the last thing, which isn't absolutely necessary, is to make a little platform for the spigot to sit on. So you don't have to do this part. And it's instant to do anyway. Tiny bit of clay. Just center it. Don't make it too thin. The spigot is going to be drilled through the hole into the jar, and there's a curve to the jar, so you don't want to make this thin, you want it to be thicker so that you can slice a little bit off the back in a sort of a curve so that you can actually fit it to the jar. And there'll be a hole drilled right in the center there, and I suppose I could put it in now, actually. I wonder if that would help. No, I think I'll wait. Although, just to, let's see if I can do this carefully. You feel for the center. Pull your finger back. and that will be fastened to the bottom of the jar so that it actually, the spigot goes on, tightens on, and that's it. I can probably push that a bit closer because I think that might be a little big. It might not be, it might be too small, who knows, I haven't measured it. And there's the whole debate about spigots, because do you want to use plastic, wood, or the old-fashioned, not the old-fashioned, the style we used to use, which are actually made of brass. And there's a discussion. Anyway, here you go. That's it. That's the demo, and I'll show you all about the trimming and the carving later on. Okay, the urn, for a water urn basically, has to have a spigot put on the bottom from that little piece I threw, and also I need to paint the black on the actual area where I'm going to carve it. So, and this, you know, Poubelle walking away again. Anyway, I'll get onto that next. Okay, this jar has to have this little spigot holder at the bottom down here, and I'm trying to wait until they're just the right conditions so that the clay is not going to bend when I pick it up, but it's still like totally smudgeable with your finger, and that way when I stick it on you hardly have to do much at all, it will just stick. The problem, of course, is that this is actually flat and that has a curve to it. So you've got to try and give that a bit of a curve. Right, so this just seems to be the right size, and it's a total eyeball thing here. You just got to cut across, and that's what I said. You're basically trying to make sure that it's not going to bend as you're doing this, but you want to be able to give it a little bit of a curve, and then you just have to look. I mean, yeah, that's almost immediately you're just getting it the right curve there. Now, it also, you've got to determine, is this okay to be pointing downwards? Because it's not flat like this. So you could actually curve it even more and cut an angled cut so that this sits flatter on there. But I've always found, I'm going to do it this time, but I've always found that the more you fudge and fiddle with something, the less satisfactory it becomes. Straight, because I cut a little bit out. And you could even go further with that, so that you really get it very flat on there. But you've got to remember, the more you fiddle, the more chance you are going to, it now has a little bit too much at the edges, and that's why I say the more you do this, the more chances are you are actually going to create a little bit of work where there's more chance to get something wrong. So, but I'll try and do this just to kind of, because it is the best way of doing it, obviously. But and once you've got it close, then you've got to do all your scoring a little bit. I don't really have to do this because it's very soft, but I'm going to do it because it'll be a lot easier to press on there. I threw this little piece, pushed my finger through it as well, so we've got a hole pre-drilled. The hole is actually too big for the spigot that I'm actually going to put in, but I also wanted to talk about that because the spigots, when I started doing pottery back in the 1970s, we used to use wooden spigots, but they are driven in with a cork, and when you first put water in, the cork is not swollen, so the water will leak out a little bit, and it takes a good bit of time before that cork swells and becomes completely watertight. So there was always like little drips coming out of those at first, but eventually it would sort of swell up. But I always wondered about that too, like for food and safety purposes, is that cork going to harbor bacteria? So the cork idea, I guess, faded out, and people started using metal spigots, and I still have a couple of those. But then there was the problem with the metal spigots because they were mostly brass. If they were stainless, it wouldn't be a problem at all. But they were actually brass, and California, I think it was, discovered that brass had lead in the solder or something, the mix of making brass. I think it's you know, and I think it's what's called an alloy, and it contains some lead in it to make the copper. I think brass is made of bronze, copper maybe, and tin, but I think it had some lead in it too. Okay, that's where it's going to go. So I'm just going to, this is very soft down here. I threw this yesterday and it's been in my damp cupboard all night. Okay, just give it a little bit more. I think it's pretty soft already. Almost don't have to do this, but I'm going to put a little bit of moisture in there. Just mix this up a little bit. I mean, it's very, very soft. I could squish this easily in my hands. And then we're going to place it on and move it around. It's not the end of the world, I guess, if it's pushes it in just a touch. I can put my hand inside to actually push back a little bit too, which I probably will do. Am I tall enough? Yeah, I am, yeah. So I'm just pushing that in. Can we see here? Yeah. This is not that necessary because the actual clay wall at the bottom there is thick. So I'm doing this purely as a decorative element. It's not an absolute function that it has to be there. Because the wall, you could put the hole in it and just, but it would look a little bit less attractive, I think. Ooh. Yeah, my arm up there. There's a hard angle to hold there. And then we're just going to clean it up a little bit. Now you could make this really thick. I mean, there's a whole way of doing these. I'm just doing one thing there. But now I'm not worrying about the height of this because I made a stand for it. In the video that you saw me throw a stand for it, so. And I'm going to drill a hole through the wall in there, so I don't really have to clean up much in that area there either. I'm making 2 of these. I have an order for 1. Now I'm just looking at it and trying to make sure it's still pretty flat. It is actually, so. You could even use the back of the paintbrush just to do that if you wanted to. But I know that I'm going to have my spigot tap in there anyway. I'm going to be cutting that hole out there, I think. No, I don't have a tap with me anyway. That's the one thing. And then the next thing you have to do is paint the actual black area from here to here. Will have a carving. But I wanted to show you something before I do that. I've talked about cutting through plates. People have asked questions about plates and things like that. This was bought in England long time ago, and I don't know if you can still get these or not. I think maybe Bailey Pottery has something that could be used for this as well. I think they use it, I've seen it pulled across a pug mill for cutting clay off. But anyway, this is easy to make. It's a piece of rebar in its simplest form, which is metal they use for reinforcing concrete. But mine is great because it has gouges all the way down the arm there, set at 1/2 inch increments. So you could put this wire anywhere and cut slabs of any thickness you want. On both ends it has those. And it's a guitar string that you pull across, and this is a thin guitar string, not the thinnest, but one of the thinnest. But it's great for plates and flatware because you just use one hand and you cut through. So every plate that I've got has the thinnest bit of clay left on the bat as possible with the guitar string, but you can do all this one-handed. You don't need to pull a wire through a plate or anything. You just hold it. You can do it even. I don't do it like this. I usually put the piece on a wheel head just for stability, but you can just cut through like that, and it's easy. But you can do it as I just showed you one-handed. So get a piece of rebar and try and manufacture yourself one of these. And I mean, I don't know if you don't have the ability to bend a piece of rebar. I'm sure you could find a local garage, car garage, where they have a vise, and they could bend it for you in like 1 minute. So, and if they're really helpful to you, possibly they have a drill press, so they could drill a hole at the two ends of the rebar, and even do holes at different increments, so that you could actually have 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 2 inch lengths. And if you wanted to have I don't use it that way anyway, but there's ways you could modify it. It's a great tool to have. It's one of the most important tools in my studio. Right? Okay, well, I'm just going to paint this black next. Okay, these are Japanese hake brushes. I think they're called hake brushes. And I've got some black slip here. The black slip is just basically 20, let me think of what the recipe is. 40% ball clay, 20% EPK, 20% silica, 10% potash feldspar, and 10% Frit 3110. There you go. So that's the slip recipe here. And to thicken it, if it's a bit thin, you just add vinegar and it will thicken it up and make it so it doesn't run very easily. So when you put it on the brush, it doesn't run off and all that. And I'm just going to paint it. I don't want to spray this, airbrush it. I'd rather paint the area in the center so I don't get black clay all over it. But make sure this isn't dripping. And then, oh, this wheel's got a wobble to it. This is a fairly cheap wheel. I should get my Shimpo wheel. You could do this on an electric wheel, actually. So when you're actually doing this, you just kind of try not to miss any areas, but if you do, you're going to do this 3 times anyway, so you want to make sure that you don't get any runs going down that get time to dry in there. This piece has been sitting for 24 hours almost in a damp cupboard, so it's firmed up. If this was freshly thrown, I wouldn't put this much slip on it, because you could actually, first of all, the pressure of just putting the brush down would probably do something to the form, but it would actually make it so wet that it could collapse, because I'm putting a fairly thick layer of slip on here. And this will take about an hour to actually firm up. And then you would do a second coat, and then another hour, depending on humidity of course, you could do a third coat. I've always found that 2 coats leave the brush strokes, but if you do third coat, you don't get the brush strokes. But notice the slip isn't running down, because there was enough vinegar so the slip was actually thickened up a little bit, so it doesn't run. And if there was a little bit, you can trim it off anyway. I guess it's not the end of the world. But I want to make sure I get that nice edge down there. There you go, and then pull the brush up so we get a nice even layer. And the top I might have to trim just a touch off. I'll do a carving at the top anyway. Okay, so 2 more coats, identical to that. You're just going to put 2 more coats on, and then when it becomes leather hard, you'll start carving, which I'll show you in the next part of the video. Alright, so now I've started doing the drawing. Very, very subtle, kind of very light pressure, but I'm actually carving into the black slip that you saw me apply just a few minutes. Well, this is now a day later, so the clay is still pretty soft, but all I have to do is lightly touch the surface because it's still fairly soft, and you can make a little mark, and it's basically just a guideline so that I can actually, I should work on this way so you can see as I go, but basically just a touch and it carves the piece out. But later, when I've done the whole drawing, I will come back at this and make these lines a little bit more clear. It actually is easy to go too deep when the clay is this soft. But I like to do it at this point just to do the outline, because if I make a mistake, I can actually just paint some slip back in. And this is still soft enough so I can get clay smudged on my finger. So it's much too soft to do the the full carving. Just a light touch. This is just a little cove where the boats are actually, lobster boat, fish shack basically, and then some houses. This is what the coastline looks right around here. So it's like drawing, just freehand sketching basically. And now I've done the explanation, I'll do a stop motion bit so we can put this in and you'll see it develop. That was quite a afternoon. It stormed all afternoon, the wind, the rain. I mean, it's just a really, atmospheric day. Can't really see much, but it's foggy now, totally fogged in with a bit of water at the front. But so it took 4 to 5 hours, maybe 6 hours. I didn't. Oh, it's 6 o'clock. Yeah, no, this is a 6-hour job today. So that's a lot of work on that piece, and it is still very soft down here, so I can actually take the clay off. But it was leather hard, and it's a past leather hard up there, so I carved from the top down to time it properly. And tomorrow I'll just basically do the fluting, which I've still got to do a little bit at the top and the bottom. Okay, the lid was a little tight, and I always anticipate that because I make the rim really thick when I'm throwing it. So I have just trimmed it just using one of my little metal ribs I've shown you I used before, and as it's turning, just basically scraping some off on the inner side there. I'd rather do that than trim the lid really thin, because the lid is the thing that gets picked up a lot, and if it's thin, it gets dropped, it'll break easily. So it's better to trim this one down, which is why I make it so thick at the beginning, and that now fits perfectly. It's got a little, because the glaze will take up space, so I leave a little bit of movement, but that is a perfect fit, and so that's basically all I've got to do with that. Okay, so all I have to do with the base, and you can do this in many ways by doing a diagonal or a vertical kind of fluting, but I simply take my trimming tool, trying to be straight. You get a feel for this. The first time you pull down, it may not be perfect, but eventually your fingers get into the groove, as they say. Because it's nice if these are fairly straight. And I put that groove, I trim this piece first, and I put a groove into the bottom part so the tool stops at the same place every time. And that's it. Alright, so the last thing I have to do is put the hole in the jar, which I can't do till tomorrow.